right? So if you're looking at Emory College itself, it's 10.3% now. So all these really popular schools in these major metropolitan areas have gotten much more competitive in recent years. So as you can see here, these are Emory's peer institutions. And in just a few short years, we're looking at maybe 5 year spans, the acceptance rates across the board. And the one thing that many of these schools have in common is that most of these are in big city areas, right? It's no surprise because, of course, if you live in a different state or if you are an international applicant, where do you want to go, right? You're not going to want to go in a small college town in the middle of nowhere you haven't heard of. You're going to want to go to a big city, right? So this is a trend that you need to be aware of, which means, while yes, if one of the schools that you're aiming for is on that list, most certainly apply, but you also want to maybe broaden your search radius, because if everybody is applying to the same name brand schools, then of course it's going to make it harder for everybody. Okay. Another trend that you want to be aware of these days is that more and more students are taking advantage of early action and early decision. So just as a heads up, because I'm not sure if everybody is aware of the difference between early action and early decision. Early action means you apply early and then you find out early that you don't have to decide to go there until all your regular decisions have been announced. Whereas for early decision, you apply early and you also find out early, but if they accept you, you are obligated to go. Now that sounds a little scary, but hopefully if you are applying to your dream school, it shouldn't be one of those things where you feel like, oh my goodness, I have to go to my dream school, right? You should actually be jumping for joy that you got into your dream school. Now, of course, one of the benefits of applying for early decision is that the acceptance rates historically for early decision have been higher than just for regular early action. So a smart play is if you're actually really interested in a certain school, you should check to see whether or not they actually have early decision. Okay, there we go. Thank you. All right. So, given the extremely low overall rates that you saw earlier for the Ivy Leagues, right? So, pretty much across the board for all the Ivy Leagues, their overall acceptance rates are now below 10%. And in many cases, it's significantly lower, right? Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, you're looking at like 3 something percent overall. On the bright side, early decision and EA, their acceptance rates have not fallen as much. And in many cases, you're going to see that it's actually going to be significantly higher than the overall rates. One key trend that we see recently is that these schools are also accepting a larger percentage of their overall freshman class through EA and ED, which is also going to explain why the rates haven't dropped as much as the overall rates. So the great thing here is if you plan ahead of time, right? Sometimes even 2, 3, 4 years in advance, you can really check out to see which schools you're most interested in. You can build a relationship with the school. You can show interest in the school, perhaps. You can do a summer program there, do research with professors at the school to hopefully help enhance your chances of getting in. As you can see here, it's been across the Ivy Leagues, right? So it is from as low as 33% for Cornell in terms of the incoming class being accepted through ED to as much as 50% for UPenn, right? So it's a pretty large number there in terms of the number of students who are now getting accepted from the early round. Okay, so these are the most recent numbers for EA and ED. We only have about half of the Ivy Leagues because there's this new thing right now where colleges don't release their admissions data as soon as they're available because they don't want to add to the growing hysteria. People are freaking out because these acceptance rates are so low, so they wait a year or two before announcing them now. So as you can see here, there's too much change, right? Harvard didn't really change that much. Yale didn't really change too much. Brown, of course, went down about 2.5%. But overall, it's still significantly better than if you're applying for overall or for regular decision. In fact, if you were to compare this to their RD only rates, then the gap becomes even bigger, right? When I say RD only rates, most schools, when they announce the overall rate, this is including regular decision and the early, right? So even that is, I'm sorry to say, unusually high by comparison. So if Harvard's overall rate is at about 3.4%, the percentage of getting in for RD is a low 2.6%. So if you really look at it, 7.4% for EA is actually 2.8 times the RD only rate, right? So as you can see, it's a significant advantage to apply for early. Now, it gets even more for the schools that have ED, right? Remember how I said for ED, it's even a bigger boost in terms of your chances of getting in? It goes as high as 4.7% for Dartmouth. So if Dartmouth is your dream school, you have almost a five-time like increase in your chances of getting in by deciding which school strategically you want to go for ED. Okay. Now, of course, the numbers look really appealing, right? It tells the story that early action is really one of those ways to get into a certain school. It's a little bit more complicated than that. As you're probably aware, this 2 to 4% increase looks really appealing, but many of these schools will also use these early rounds to do special recruiting. Okay, even the Ivy Leagues have to field sports teams, of course, right? And of course, they're also going to accept some students who are like VIP cases, right? So, there's the occasional like, oh, she's a world-class cellist, or he's the son of a Saudi prince, right? There's always going to be those special cases where they will make exceptions for people to get in. But even if you factor that every single year, let's say, for instance, Brown, right? So Brown every single year will accept about 200 recruited athletes through their early round. Okay, and if you factor in maybe another 100 VIP cases, even if you factor that out, you're still going to see that their 14.58% ED rate will maybe fall to about 10.2% once separate those special cases, which is still an astounding 3% over their RD only rate. So as you can see, making a strategic decision about which choice you make for ED can help your chances tremendously. But here's a catch, you can only ED to one school, right? So it takes a lot of work for you to be able to research which school or schools might be the ones that you want to consider, right? And oftentimes for ED, because if you apply for ED and you get in, you lose the chance to find out if you could have gotten to other schools. So it makes sense for you to really make that choice wisely. Visit the school if you have the opportunity. If it's, like, say, within visiting range, if it's something you can drive to, wonderful, right? Make the trip with your parents, okay? Or if you find a reason to be there anyway, like if you're going to be there for like a summer program, right? So check out the schools in a certain area if you have the opportunity. Okay, so the question then becomes, is it really worth it to apply for ED? Yes, even with those special cases, it makes sense, right? There are a couple of key reasons for that, right? So one is that, of course, if you're applying early, it signals to the school that you're very genuinely interested in them, okay? Now, there are going to be some cases, though, where it may not make as much sense as others. When you're picking which school to apply for ED, it's probably not the best idea to pick a school that is way beyond your numbers, right? So if it's like a far-reach dream school, the risk there is that because the EA-ED application pool is going to be very, very competitive, you might not look as competitive by comparison, okay? Now, on the flip side, you don't want to sell yourself short either in ED to a school that you could have easily gotten to. And because at that point you could have been selling yourself short, you might have been be able to get to better colleges. Okay. So there's really that fine line where you need to do your research, you need to find a school that is a little harder for you to get in, but it's not completely out of the question. In my experience, that is the best target range for an ED pool because you maximize your chances, you're in a competitive pool. Also make sure that if you get accepted, it's to the best possible school you could have gotten accepted into. Okay. Now, oftentimes, though, here's a situation we run into. If a student has poor grades in 11th grade, then you might also just want to consider applying to safety schools for the early round. Because chances are, if your grades weren't great in 11th grade, many schools will choose to defer you instead. What that means is that instead of accepting you, instead of just rejecting you either, they will just say, oh, you know what, let's reconsider the student during the regular decision round because they want to see whether or not your grades actually improved, right? So they're giving you a second chance. But if you are rejected outright, of course, at that point, then you're going to have to look at other things. Okay, so that's pretty much the trend right now for early action and early decision. So like I said, definitely do your research. Make sure that you consider certain schools that you are very competitive for. The next trend that we see is that there's now a growing emphasis on students' character. Okay, are you a good person? Okay, so we see this. There are some statistics from an organization called NACAC. NACAC is the National Association for College Admissions Counselors. And every year we attend their conferences and seminars. And one of the key things that we discovered is that many schools are now prioritizing things like your positive character attributes, among other things. And of course, this isn't just something that you can figure out in a vacuum, right? So this category is also very closely woven to other factors, like, of course, your essays or your recommendation letters, because that is how they see who you are, right? There was a survey in terms of where counselors will find this information. And of course, no surprise, the contents of the essay will probably be the biggest determining factor, as well as your recommendation letters. Okay, so one of the key sort of unfortunate parts of the process of college admissions is that it's a very indirect process. What I mean by that is that admissions people will pretty much almost never meet you in person. So what they do is they try to make sound decisions about who you are and whether or not you're a good fit for their institution, primarily based on indirect information. Okay, so they rely on your writing. They rely on things that are said about you by their recommenders. And of course, I'll talk about this as well, the interview. Okay, when they can, they try to figure out what kind of a person are you, right? Are you someone who cares about problems that happen around you? Are you someone who has good positive character qualities, like you're very resilient, you bounce back from adversity, okay? Are you someone who has genuine concern and compassion for other people, right? And the reason for this is really quite simple, right? I know it sounds kind of weird to say this, but colleges are inherently non-profit institutions. Yes, I said they're not-profit. Your parents are chuckling because of the amount of money they charge for tuition. But to be honest, all of that tuition really just gets cycled back into the university. They don't make money off of it. It's not like corporations where they're shareholders necessarily, right? So because they're not-profit institutions, they're mission-oriented. And the main mission of universities is to find and train future leaders, right? That's really the whole point. And the sooner you understand that, the better you will get understanding what exactly colleges are looking for. Okay, so if you're the type of person who makes an impact both academically and in your community, they want you, right? So this is why character is so important. All right, so how's that defined? What does character mean in colleges? So there have also been some surveys, and you can really kind of classify it into two different categories of traits. The one is more about your ability to thrive in an academic context, right? Do you have resilience? Do you have curiosity or perseverance? And the other is, are you a good human being, right? Do you show compassion for other people, right? Are you someone who basically helps other people, right? So these are elements that you want to have in various aspects of your college application. Okay? So best thing to do is really, when you look at it this way, your college application in a way is ideally like a form of self-marketing, right? So if any of your parents are into business, just think of that way. It's really strategically positioning yourself or marketing yourself to show why you're a good fit for that particular college, okay? Now, I know this goes against some of you are just inherently like very just humble, right? You don't like to brag. But the college application is really one of those processes where if you're not willing to advocate for yourself and tell colleges why you're an outstanding student, who will, right? So, I mean, there are even some application systems that don't accept recommendation letters. So in those cases, you absolutely have to advocate for yourself because otherwise you won't necessarily stand apart from all the different applicants. Okay, so one of the best ways to demonstrate your character, of course, is through the essay, right? And if you're a rising senior, this is probably your biggest sort of like, this is your bane right now. Sitting there in front of your computer trying to think of ideas to write the essay. This is probably the thing you most regret. It doesn't have to be. Okay, so one of the key things we talk about is that this is really for colleges to get to know you. This is your face to the admissions office, right? So in doing so, you're going to want to think of topics that basically articulate the type of self that you want to promote to them, right? If you, let's say, for example, are just very hardworking, you're very determined, and you're very competitive, it would be good to find a narrative or anecdote that best exemplifies that point. Okay, if you see yourself as more of a people person, you get along with other people, you can navigate through social kind of situations very easily. then of course, lean on your strengths. Okay. Find a way to leverage what you do best in terms of the application essay. Okay. One key thing here too, and I've seen this, I've seen like admissions committees pour through essays. In fact, I got a chance to do this myself, but on a graduate context. I entered in Harvard's grad school admissions office, and I got to evaluate PhD applications. And the process is very much the same. What they tell you here is that you're not necessarily looking at who the person is, but you're also evaluating the writing as a way of seeing basically how this person thinks, how this person articulates themselves. Those are also important things as part of the college application process. Okay, now here's a big trend that you need to be aware of. You're probably all aware of this new thing called Chat GPT, although it's probably been out for a year or so now. Colleges, this is also one of those hot topics now in college admissions, because I'm pretty sure you've seen videos and you've seen articles of people saying like, okay, Chat GPT, write me a college application essay. Okay, so the temptation will be there, but I guarantee you, and I definitely want to let you know, colleges have also been thinking about this. This was a conversation point in the last like national conference, right? So just be aware, if you feel the urge to try to use something like that, they're now looking into possible software, similar to what you have with turnitin.com, so that they now have like anti-AI software to determine or try to figure out whether or not a certain essay incorporates a bit of AI generated text. Okay, so that's really where, for this whole process, you need to resist the urge to take shortcuts. Okay, so this is definitely going to be the most important piece of writing that you're going to be able to do. So really, especially if your whole point is to show your character, demonstrate character by not succumbing to shortcuts. Okay, this has to be your best work, but it has to be your work. Okay, and lastly, I know it sounds weird because the essay is typically a very private issue for many students. You really should take advantage of your friends and family. Okay, because sometimes you might see yourself in one way, but you don't see the complete picture as much as you would think, right? We sometimes self-delude ourselves. We don't necessarily see positive attributes as much, especially if you're maybe a little down on yourself sometimes. So talking to your parents, talking to your closest friend can be an excellent sounding to be able to discover qualities or traits that you didn't even know that colleges would appreciate. Okay, so try to tap into those resources, try to take advantage of that. All right, another important thing that colleges will take a look at, and I've worked with many students in the last few years, and our counselors at HSU have worked with many students who are very high achieving, who've been getting into outstanding schools like the Ivy Leagues, Emory, MIT, Georgia Tech, right? So in many of those cases, the one common thread that we see with a lot of these students is that they have a long history of making an impact at both their school and the local community, okay? To be honest, I mean, there's so much diversity in terms of excellent students, but the one common factor that we see almost universally is that they've made a genuine effort to make an impact in their community. Okay, so if there's a secret sauce, so to speak, in terms of these students getting to these top schools, it's this. So especially if you're a younger student, I highly encourage you to find something that you're passionate about and really commit to it. Okay, so colleges want to see that you're making an impact, because if they see that you're already doing it at a young age while you're in high school, they're more convinced that you can make that same similar impact to graduate from their school and go out to the working. Because ultimately, that's what colleges want. They want their alumni to represent the school well, so that donors will be impressed and then funnel money back to the university. That's how colleges work. Okay. Another thing too is that it's not really a big thing about like racking up hours for the sake of racking up hours. Okay, some students look at community service like, I've done my share, I've done like 100 hours. Okay, but if you go to this volunteer place and you're just kind of like mechanically going through the motions, you don't interact with the people there, it's not necessarily as useful or impressive, right? So it's not about the hour count, right? Well, sure, of course, it's mildly impressive to see a bigger hour count. But while you're doing that anyway, try to take full advantage of the interactions you can have over there. Get to know the people there. If there's a supervisor who looks over you at that volunteer place, try to really impress them, because that could also be another way that you can leverage that as far as your college applications. You could get a strong recommendation letter. And in many cases, many top colleges will allow 1 or 2 external recommendation letter writers. So it's not just your teachers, it's not just your school counselor. So if you can really get a glowing recommendation letter from a volunteer source, it would be outstanding and really help your chances. Okay. And a couple last points here. There's no tier list, right? I know tier lists are a big thing, and like if you watch YouTube right now, there's a tier list for everything, right? So there's no tier list to say which type of volunteering is better than another, because even college admissions people will have different passions or priorities, right? They won't always necessarily say that, let's say, working with special needs kids is inherently more valuable than tutoring someone at the library or working in an animal shelter. Okay. Find something that you genuinely connect with, because that's what colleges will see. Okay. They've gotten really adept at seeing people who genuinely want to be there and really do something that that they really care about. Okay. So I would highly recommend, especially for younger students, try different things, find out something that would stick, that really resonates with you as much as possible. Okay. All right. Another key major trend, and this was brought on because of the pandemic, of course, is the growing use of video interviews and video introductions. Okay. Because as you well know, during a pandemic, it became increasingly harder for them to do a traditional interview. People couldn't meet at a Starbucks anymore because of lockdown. Right. So many colleges had to pivot to find other ways to get to know students and then try to use that feedback in the college application process. So recently, and a classic example of this is Brown University. Instead of doing alumni interviews, they completely shifted to doing a video introduction. You're not actually interacting with someone, you're just uploading a 2-minute video in which you introduce yourself to the admissions office. Okay. For some students, they love this, right? Because maybe it's brought on by the fact that they had like Zoom education for a year and a half or so, right? So they're just used to being online at their computer. They're used to recording themselves. I mean, especially if you enjoy occasionally making YouTube videos or something, this is right up your alley, right? Or record yourself on like TikTok or Snapchat or whatever. This becomes second nature to some students. Okay. For some others, this is the worst thing in the world. You're like, oh no, I have to record myself on camera. Okay. But regardless, it's an optional component, but it's really there that could be taken advantage of if you know how to leverage it wisely. Okay. Now, a growing number of schools are following Brown's suit here, right? So you can see here, University of Chicago, Washington University in St. Louis, Bowdoin, George Mason, Wake Forest, right? So a lot of these, some of them might even be schools that may be on your list, are now shifting towards looking at this as a possible way. And it's only a matter of time before even more students do this, okay? So this is going to be, in many ways, it's going to be the new normal for interviews, right? Because it's going to be increasingly difficult for people to go ahead and do the in-person, interview the traditional way. Okay. One of the key things, though, that they really like about this part of the process is that it seems authentic to them, right? Because in a lot of ways, they can see you directly. Because the traditional interview, they're relying on the report of an interview, right? Yes, they're an alumnus of the school or alumna of the school, but the admissions person gets a different feel in terms of seeing you talk about yourself in person for a minute or two. Okay. So this is definitely something that even now, you definitely will probably see this in at least some of your schools. Okay. And especially, like I said, for students who are very comfortable with this, this is a great opportunity or platform to really showcase your personality to colleges. All right, so here's some tips. And this is from me having served as a Harvard interviewer for many years. This translates both well to both the in-person interview, but of course also the video interviews. The first thing at the very top here is prepare well in advance. Okay, so if you know you're going to record yourself talking about a certain school, or you're going to meet with someone online through Zoom or something, definitely make sure you've done your homework, right? If they ask you what major you want to do, and you learn something out that they don't have at their school, that's going to look kind of awkward, right? You also don't want to ask really basic surface level questions like stuff that you can easily find online, right? So it's better to ask them about their experiences. It's better to talk about your specific fit, or maybe like some professors that you've looked up that you're interested in maybe conducting research on. Okay. Now, it's also important not to sound like a robot, right? I know like it's a nerve-wracking process. So some people will want to type out or script out answers to everything. Please don't do that, okay? Prepare, but don't necessarily like over-prepare so everything sounds rehearsed, okay? The interview is a great chance to see sort of like you in your normal state. So very experienced interviewers will normally try to get people to lower their guard by asking you a lot of just like warm-up questions, some icebreakers, and it'll feel like you're just talking to someone, right? Because the whole point of that is that they want to see you sort of like unrehearsed, more spontaneous, right? And that's really what they look for, right? Because many of the questions that we had to fill out or answer in our report is that they want to find out, does this person show genuine intellectual curiosity or interest? Does this person have this kind of like, energy to them or passion, right? And it's hard to do that if it sounds like you're reading off of something, which is especially an easy temptation these days if everything becomes video, right? You have like one browser page with the person, and then you have another with your answers. Please don't do that. So practice is what you need to do to make sure that this is more natural, okay? So yeah, leads us to my next point. Practice makes perfect. Okay. So at HS2, we have a lot of resources that we compile. Every time our students do interviews with the local interviewers, we ask, oh, so what did this person ask you, right? And we will jot those down. But it's not like you necessarily need that because there are a lot of resources online to help you find out what are the typical types of questions that people may ask in an interview process, okay? And then lastly, this is a big thing that schools that are asking for these video introductions have been telling students. It's not really about the quality of the recording, the video. Some students freak out because they think, oh no, now I have to buy a better camera. Although I don't know, if you want to get an upgrade on your phone, you're going to get an excuse to tell your parents, oh, I need to record myself for my college interviews. Okay, sorry, parents. Okay, but this is a good way to really just make sure that you're focused on you, not necessarily like how well are you editing videos, right? So try to see if you can just make sure to plan out how you would go about presenting the best elements of you in the recording, right? So don't worry too much about like, oh, is my lighting okay, or is my backdrop okay, or do I need to do creative film editing and ask my prospective film major friend to edit this for me? Don't bother with that stuff. Okay, colleges want to focus on getting sort of the unvarnished, genuine, authentic you. Okay. All right. How many students here want to go for computer science or engineering? Show of hands. Oh, not as many as I thought. Okay, so I lived in Northern California for many years. So as you can imagine, with all the tech startups and stuff, this is like at least half the room would be like engineering, computer science. Okay. So one of the key things, if you're interested in some of the most competitive majors, we're talking business, we're talking pre-med, computer science, of course, engineering, there's a growing trend towards something called direct admissions. Okay, which means here is that this becomes kind of tricky because it becomes very confusing sometimes when you do research on a university and you're like, oh, the backup school, it should be pretty easy. They accept 60% of their students. Okay, but if you're interested in certain selective majors, they may have this program where you can only major in that particular field if you got in as a freshman. Okay, and unsurprisingly, the acceptance rates are going to be significantly lower for that school. Case in point, if anybody's interested in computer science, the University of Washington in Seattle is excellent for that. They typically have a top 5, top 6 undergrad for computer science. The overall rate for UW is 55%. Okay, their direct admit rate for engineering, okay, and computer science, if you're an in-state Washington student, it's about 30%. But if you're from out of state, it drops down to an incredibly low 3%. Okay, so when you're looking at possible like likely schools or backup schools, it makes sense to also factor in how hard is it for your particular major. Okay, another thing too is that it's not just a simple fact of like just is your major competitive. It's one of these things too where you need to make sure that if you're applying to a school, some schools it's easy to change majors, right? So if you applied for, let's say, something less competitive, like you applied for applied mathematics or statistics, you could change to computer science fairly easily in some cases, depending on the certain college. Okay, but in some others, it's almost downright impossible. Okay, so like University of Michigan made it a point recently so that if you are applying for computer science, they have something called advanced selection, which means if you weren't accepted, it becomes almost increasingly impossible because they've already filled up all the slots for computer science for that particular year. Okay. One really big thing is that if you are thinking of applying for these competitive majors, there's a very strong incentive now to consider applying to those schools for early action. Okay. Because what happens is that it's almost like first come, first serve. This is from Purdue. Anybody interested in applying to Purdue here? Not really? Indiana's too far. Okay. All right. So for computer science, if you applied for early action for computer science, you had about a 34% acceptance rate. And if you look at how many spaces, 2,300 people got accepted for computer science in the EA round. But in RD, only 101. Okay, yes, 16% doesn't look as bad compared to some other schools, but that's only 4%. 4% of their computer science class for that particular year were accepted in the RD round compared to the EA round. So as you can see, those spots are getting increasingly harder to get into if you didn't apply early. Okay? Which means, yes, if you have an ED school, great. But if there are some other schools that you're interested in applying to and they have an option to apply EA and you're applying for a competitive major, it makes sense to actually consider applying early. All right, and the last major trend that we'll talk about, and this is obviously very timely, okay? Those of you who've been keeping up with the news, you're probably well aware that in late June, the Supreme Court ruled that colleges can no longer factor in race as far as college admissions goes, right? So this is the big thing that a lot of people were talking about the last couple of months, okay? And so what ends up happening now is based on this decision, the Supreme Court ruled that in both public and private universities, colleges can no longer factor race in and of itself, right? Now, they did clarify, however, that schools can still factor in race as it relates to an individual experiences through an essay, which means if you faced adversity because of your race, and it doesn't have to be limited to underrepresented minorities, okay? Because I've even spoken to students that like, maybe because of the pandemic, they were victims of like racial hate, for instance, right? So this is something that affects all of us in some way. So this could be something that you are free to write about in the college application process, but it's not necessarily because they're accepting you or denying you because of your race now. They're doing so because of your own individual experiences, which in many ways, some people consider that more fair, right? All right, so the key question that I often get asked, how soon will this kick into effect? In the news, especially like how many rising seniors do we have here? Ooh, quite a few, okay. This impacts you immediately, okay? According to the Supreme Court, this takes into effect which is going to be the next class that's to be admitted. So which means for your application cycle, these colleges that you're applying to can no longer factor in your race, right? It cannot be used as a reason to not have you, like accept you, right? So in theory, that should go well, right? It should be a positive thing. Okay. However, what I want to tell you though is that you want to be cautiously optimistic with this newfound piece of information. Yes, it is going to bode well, but not necessarily as dramatically as a lot of people are thinking. So I know this is going to be, yes, the wet blanket here. We're going to talk about what this might mean in the coming years. So overall, if you look at the data of the states that have been race neutral, right? So states like California, Florida, Michigan, and for many years for their public school systems, not allowed race as a factor. And as you can see here, if they're comparing it before and after this was instituted, you're really only looking at about 1.5% in the immediate couple of years, okay? And the same is true in the experience of the UC system. So this is the data from UC Berkeley, right? So the UCs, so California decided to ban affirmative action back in as early as 1996, okay? So as you can see here, so the closest fit we have is maybe 1995 as the before. And if you take a look at the 2000 and the 2005 numbers, the bar represents the percentage of Asian students that are getting into Berkeley. And as you can see, it's not a massive jump, right? So you can see it's going up from like 39% to about 41%. So in about 6 or 7 years, the percentage of Asian students who are getting into Berkeley only really increased by a couple of percentage points. Okay, so while yes, it does go well, it's not going to be an overnight dramatic shift. Right. So what does this mean now in terms of colleges? What are they going to do in response to these trends? Okay. So based on that conference that we talked about, NACAC, many college admissions people have already been anticipating this decision to go against affirmative action for many years. So what's ended up happening is that they've already figured out or have started to talk about ways in which they can promote diversity in their colleges. Because let's face it, diversity is, of course, a good goal in itself. People just maybe disagree in terms of the way to get to that diversity, okay? Because, of course, you don't want to go to college where everybody's exactly like you, okay? But in this case, colleges are looking at ways to maintain diversity without necessarily having to rely on race itself. So they've been discussing many race-neutral options, so to speak, okay? So according to like what we've figured out here is that many colleges will now look at your essays, like I said, to determine that. Many colleges have changed their essays this year, by the way. Okay, so if you've already created a Common App account, which should have come out a few days ago, right? Harvard used to have a broad, open-ended personal or supplemental essay, right? You can write about anything you wanted to. This year, they've decided to focus on 5 short answer questions where they ask you about like how, how can you contribute to a diverse student body, right? So obviously it's right to the point. It's right to the heart of what Justice Roberts was saying when they said you can use race in the context of your own personal experiences. They've also decided to ask some other questions like, how do you hope to use your Harvard education? Describing an intellectual experience. So it's actually a lot more diversified in terms of the questions they're asking you than they have in recent years. Okay, and then lastly, so what is this race neutral that people are talking about now? What is it going to look like? Well, some people have suggested that they might use socioeconomic background now. In other words, like they might decide to go ahead and factor in how much income your parents make as an alternative to using race options. Okay, with the idea here that more affluent areas tend to be more white or Asian, right? And so they're trying to increase their diversity this way. Some others have decided to maybe use something like what Texas uses, which is more geographical diversity, okay? Which means they're going to start accepting percentages of students based on like how they rank in their classes based on a whole range of high schools, right? So these are ways to artificially increase diversity in colleges, because then if you are, say, for instance, like selecting students from a wide range within the state, then you're able to at least have some sort of diversity within the campus this way without overtly using race. Okay. Some others have even talked about using zip codes, right, to basically target specific areas, right? So the key thing here, though, is that like this is not really something that you can control too much. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about it, because I've already heard some parents freaking out, asking me like, should we move? Should we move to a different high school? Don't do that, please. Okay, because the reason why is that if you did decide to move to an area that's more, let's say, ethnically diverse, you also have to weigh, right, like what's high school going to be like, right? Is it going to be a competitive high school? Because part of the reason why some of the high schools you go to are more competitive is that it already has a long-standing reputation. So you don't want to jeopardize that just to maybe strategically try to, be ahead of where colleges might go. Okay. So the best thing to do is just really, really, like I said, have a broad range of activities that show colleges that you are a good person and that you are open to, experiencing and interacting with people from all different walks and backgrounds. Right. I think that's really the key thing. You don't want to be trying to outguess where colleges are going to go at this point, because it's just way too early. Okay. So this is what's going on right now in colleges. And it's really important, like I said, just continue to work hard. Grades are still your #1 priority, but it's really important to then assess what different clubs and activities you're joining, what different volunteer experiences that you're having right now, and really try to articulate that both in the essay and, of course, also in things like the college interview. Okay, so at this point, those are my main recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for an excellent presentation. So while we are transferring to the second speaker, probably we allow for one question first. I know you will probably have a lot of questions, but probably we will have the whole Q&A later on, and you will have time to talk with Patrick and speaking about any question from student, parents. That's a question. Okay. Patrick, I live in East Cobb since 1985. So you got a 6 high school, Cole, Walton, Exeter. I have noticed over the last 5 or 6 years, the top #1 students, #2 students, at least 4 or 5 are going to Georgia Tech versus Ivy League school. Do you know why? Is because they like to stay here, or they just don't care too much about Ivy League?
It could be a number of factors, right? So it could just be that Georgia Tech fits better what their goals are. maybe they would like to stay more locally. I know that's something that we kind of noticed too when we first set up our offices in Texas, right? So there is a stronger inclination to maybe stay closer to home. I think that could be part of it too. I think it's also just they're not as necessarily confident about their chances to apply. And I think maybe that's also a byproduct of being a little bit too conservative, right? So, sometimes we do have to tell students that, hey, your numbers are actually pretty competitive. You can take a shot at some of these groups, okay? So that might be part of it, okay? Part of it as well could be like sometimes counselors will also take an error on being more conservative and not necessarily push those students to try for more schools, okay? I mean, these days, we typically have our students apply to something like 10 to even 15 colleges. It's okay to take a shot at some top schools and see where you get in, as long as you have enough backup schools under there, right? But I think some students, it's just too emotionally, like they put themselves too much of a risk and they don't want to try for more, and they could have actually attained more, right? They could have gotten into higher or selected school potentially. Okay, so it's balanced that, but like it's sometimes it's just an individual decision. Okay, so it's difficult to see whether or not like we would need more data to find out like what is going on with the decisions there. Okay.
Thank you. So let's take this next speaker is from California. So Duanduan Hsieh is from the Hsieh College, very famous college from in LA. And so for the people in the online, so if you have all sort of question, so we will have a final Q&A, but sorry, we need to mute you. If you have any feedback, just feel free to have a chat and we can probably note down those questions. So if you have any comment, just leave your comment on the chat. All right, so we will let the Duanduan to speak.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Can we just take a second and can everyone in the room stand up really quickly? Thank you. And let's just do some stretches because I know we've been sitting for a while. So that's all. I'm just giving you a freebie to stretch for a little bit, get that blood pumping, and learn more about college admission because I know it's a lot of heavy stuff. And so I want you guys to have an opportunity to take a break. And whenever you're ready, you can sit back down. Great. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Duanduan Hsieh. I am in Los Angeles right now. I'm currently working for Occidental College, which is a small liberal arts college located in Los Angeles. I'm not going to talk about Oxy today, but if you want to learn more, I have a little QR code at the end of the presentation that you can scan, and you're welcome to reach out to me as well. But I've been working in admission for a few years. I am the college or the admissions people that Patrick has been referring to in the last presentation. And I think that we proceed very well in terms of going from his presentation in terms of overview of applications and my presentation, which is really a focus on how do you stand out from the crowd? How do you create your own narrative? How do you showcase to colleges who you are, since we're not often able to have this face-to-face interaction? Just to give you a quick idea, I work for Pitzer College and Occidental College, both located in Southern California. We receive quite a number of applications every year. And just to give you an idea of what our workload is, I read about 800 applications a year. That equals to about 1,600 to 2,000 essays. So just something to keep in mind. And I don't read a lot of applications compared to a lot of my colleagues who read 3,000, 5,000 applications a year. So it's really important, I think, when you're thinking about your college application process to remember that there is a person behind the computer screen. Even though you don't interact with them, there's going to be multiple people who are looking at application who's going to read them and try to make a sound decision on whether you're a good fit to their college based off of what you're submitting in your application. So I know common application, I'm going to focus on common application today, even though there's a lot of different other applications out there. But they're all the same idea that you fill it up online, you type your essays in there, you click submit, and you just wish for the best. And I just want to remind everyone that there is a person behind the screen reading those applications. And so in terms of spelling, in terms of proofreading, those things are all equally as important when you're before you hit that big submit button. So what is in an application? And I know Patrick covered this a little bit, but these are the main things that are in an application, right? You have your academics, your transcript with your grades. What is the rigor in courses that you're taking? Are you taking honors, APs, and IBs? Are those offered at your high school? You have your personal essay, whether that's a common application essay, coalition application essay, UC essays, things like that. Your letters of recommendation, your counselor letter of rec, your teacher's letter of rec, your extracurriculars. How many extracurriculars are you doing? How do you spend your time outside of the school? You have your supplemental essays. These are essays that you're writing specifically for the college. Oftentimes, the question is, why are you applying to us, right? That's a main supplemental essay. You have your testing, SAT and ACT. You have demonstrated interest. Does anyone know who demonstrated interest is? It's a show of interest to the college that you're applying to. So things like doing a campus tour, doing an interview, emailing the offices, joining in virtual information sessions. Those are all things that are counted in your demonstrated interest. In fact, it's 2023, so I think it's pretty apparent that technology is integrated in all of our lives. But if you didn't know this, colleges actually have, Big Brother data where we can look at whether or not you open our emails, whether or not you click on the links that we send you. Those are all counted oftentimes into your demonstrated interest. Not every college does count demonstrated interest, but a lot of colleges still do. So that's something to think about. You can do an interview, whether it's in person, whether it's over Zoom, whether it's with an alumni, and there's also athletic recruitment. If you're thinking about playing a sports in college, those are things that are all considered. Obviously, there's a lot more things that are included in the application, but these are the main things that most colleges are looking at. So let's say all of these things, each of them represents a tree, right? They're in their individual tree. So when you're looking at the personal essay, you're looking at the personal essay tree. I want you to think of your application as a forest. And oftentimes what colleges are doing, what admission officers are doing when we're reading your application is we're looking at the entire forest and not each specific tree. So we're looking at your whole application and trying to make a determining factor in terms of, is this the right application for us? Does it hit all the criteria? So I want you to focus less on, oftentimes I think when students are thinking about the application, they're like, I don't have the test scores that I want, or I don't have the extracurriculars that this college necessarily needs. But oftentimes, that tree might be a little smaller, but your other trees can kind of take it into effect and cover your application as a whole and still, be able to compel and create a strong application for that college. This is what we call holistic admission, is when we are looking at the entire picture instead of each specific thing. And this is what most colleges in the US do. Another way to look at holistic admission is that we're just trying to understand your story. And that really is what, at the end of the day, that's what it is. Your application to us is your story. We want to learn about who you are, what you do, why you're interested in us, what you're looking for 5 years down the road, what you're looking for 10 years down the road. This is your story right now as a rising senior, right? You're like 60% there, 70% there. And what that means is that there's a lot of things in your college application that you can't change, right? Your 9th grade grades, your 10th grade, 11th grade, those are all set in stone. You can't really change them anymore. If you got a C, your 9th grade, can't really change it anymore. You can only improve from there, right? If you've been working extracurriculars for the last 3 years, you probably want to stick to your senior year and kind of see that out. There's a lot of things that you've been already working towards your application that you didn't know while you were still in high school. What you can change is your college essay, right? That's the one thing that you haven't worked on at all. Or hopefully you have worked on it, it's already August. But that's something that you can do right now until, November, December, January, whenever the first application is that goes out. So I really want us to focus on, building that college essay tree, making sure that it's a strong and sturdy tree that can be added to your forest, that could be, something that is in control of your narrative, your story, your application to colleges. Okay, so let's look at the Common App essay prompts, which were just released. These are the ones for this year. There's a lot to choose from, right? So I'll help you narrow it down. Has anyone started, raise their hand, has anyone started their college essays or their personal statement? You're very small on my screen, but I don't think I see any hands. So we should start working on them. If you're a rising senior, we should start working on those essays. Even if it's a draft or just a bullet point, you should start working on those right away. Don't wait until the school year starts. Okay, so let's look at the college essay prompts for this year. The first one I want to draw your attention to is the one on the very bottom. It's share an essay on any topic of your choice. It can be one you've already written, one that responds to a different prompt, or one of your own design. Oftentimes, give you a little insider peek, this is seen as a copped out prompt because it's kind of a catch-all afterwards. So oftentimes, what we see is students, put in a paper that they wrote or an essay that they wrote for their classes. Doesn't really answer the main objective or the main prompt for the essays. So I'm just going to get rid of that one. Let's look at all the other ones. There are 6 left in here. I'm going to highlight the words that I think are the most important in each of these questions. Okay, we can take a look at that. Right, these are the questions or each of the questions, I think what they're really asking. Let's get rid of everything else, right? And I think for each of these, you can attach the question what to it. So what is your background, identity, interest, or talent? What affects you? What do you learn? What are you thinking? What makes you happy or thankful? What affects you or motivates you? What's your personal growth? What's a new understanding of yourself that you've had recently? What captivates you? What do you want to learn more? Are we sensing a theme in all of these questions? You, right? They're asking about you. And so that's really what colleges are looking for in what we often call the Common App essay refer to it as a personal statement. It's a place where you can brag and talk about yourself and really advocate for yourself and put yourself out there. And it's a one thing that you still have in control today that you can work on in your common application. So that's why there's so much emphasis on the essay, whether it's from college counselors, your college counselors, from your high school counselors, from admission officers. Oftentimes when people are asking, what's the most important thing in an essay or in an application, we say it's an essay. So how do you write an essay? Let's start off with how do colleges evaluate the essay, right? What do you want to learn what we do? There's kind of 2 main things that we look at. One is how do you write your essay? What's your grammar? What's your style? What's your structure? Is it organized and well thought out? Did you put in a lot of effort into it? Was it something that you wrote at the last minute? I think this one really holds true to the supplemental essays. We can immediately tell if you wrote an essay right before you hit submit. It's very clear. And the reason for that is, we have your personal statement, your Common App essay that is often very well thought out, that have been proofread many, many times by your friends, your family, your college counselor, your personal consultants, if you have them. We can tell when an essay has been edited and well thought out. And there's not a problem with that because in colleges, we also want you to turn in your papers and your essays with well thought out, proofread, edited, pieces of words that you've kind of strung together. But then when you get to that supplemental essay, when we ask you, why are you interested in applying to us? Why are you interested in joining our community? And it's that essay's grammar, style, and structure is very different from the personal essay. Most colleges will assume that this is a backup school for you, right? You're not really interested in the school. Maybe your parents said that you should apply. Maybe your college counselor said you should apply as a backup option. But it's something that we definitely take into consideration when we're looking at essays. We also want to learn about you, right? What are you passionate about? What are your curiosities? What's your personal story? What's your personality like? So these are kind of 2 things that we mostly look at in your essay, and we'll write notes about, who you are as a person through your essays. Keep in mind that there are also, and I touched upon this a little bit already, but there are other sections in the Common App that colleges will use to evaluate your writing as well. So there's an additional information section that asks, is there any additional information that you would like to provide to the college? There was a COVID question, how has COVID affected you? That question wasn't, here's another insider point, that question wasn't very effective because COVID affected all of us. And so it's not something that oftentimes I received a lot of essays that were another 5-paragraph long essay about how COVID has affected the world. And I'm like, me too. Like, it's affected me too. So I know what COVID was. Make sure you proofread each section. This includes your extracurricular descriptions as well. So for every extracurriculars, you get a few lines where you can write a description of what that extracurricular is. Those are all things that we consider in your writing abilities. So it's not just your essay. There are 7 prompts on the common essay. So which prompt should I choose? I think these are 3 important questions, and feel free to take pictures of these slides if you would like. But which one will tell the admission officer something that they don't already know? So are you able to share an anecdote or an experience that wasn't referred to in your extracurriculars, wasn't in your letters of recommendation, wasn't in your supplemental essays, right? You don't want to repeat something and take up valuable real estate and share something that we already know, right? Which one can you answer best in your own unique voice? So being able to share your own voice, your own personality, that's something that's really important. Which one will allow you to write clearly, concisely, and with conviction? Organization, strong essay writing skills. Those are all things that we consider. And so that's really important when you're choosing your prompts. Here are some common topics. I see all of these multiple time every year. You have the ode to the family members. My most inspirational figure is my mom, my grandma, my aunt, my uncle. I had a sports injury. I've been playing soccer all my life, and then I tore my ACL. Okay. Why do I want to become a doctor? A very strong, statement of purpose that's often very dry. Summer camps, death, major life events. These are all common topics that we see. There's nothing, the common topics are common because a lot of people have these shared experiences and have a lot to say about them. It doesn't make them bad choices. I think you just need to be authentic and share the story the right way. So sports injuries, for example, the most common mistake I see in essays like about sports injuries is, I've been playing soccer my whole life. I tore my ACL and I had to give that up. And then the essay ends there. That's not a very strong essay because it doesn't have an ending, right? You have the beginning and the middle, and then it doesn't have the ending, right? What we're curious in, okay, there's been something you've been working on towards your whole life, and then now you can no longer do it. What have you done next? You don't have all those soccer practices anymore. What have you been using that time to convert into another extracurricular? Or what are you interested in colleges, since you aren't going to be playing soccer in college? Why are you interested in going to college? What do you want to achieve afterwards? So there's a lot of different ways to kind of attack these common topics if there's something that you still want to talk about. Ode to family members is a really important one too. Oftentimes I'll see a very common mistake where someone will be talking about their grandma, and I'll learn so much about the grandma and nothing about the student. So spend 2 to 3 sentences at the beginning of the essay to talk about that inspirational figure, and then spend the rest of the 600 words to talk about how that person has affected you and what you kind of take from that. Here are some other common mistakes as well. Slang, profanity, text style chats like BRB, not considering the reader. Think about anyone could be reading your application and there's no, that's out of your control. But there's folks that are in very different ages and very different backgrounds working in the field. And so that's something to think about as well. Not everyone's going to be, super old or super young. Your topic, tone of writing is too young or too immature. So think about your topic very closely and try to determine what's a good balance for that. Essays that we learn nothing about you. I kind of mentioned that with the grandma essay, for example, coming across as being judgmental. I think this one's really important. You can definitely write about a topic that you're passionate about, but make sure that your tone isn't too judgmental in those essays. You never know who's going to be reading your essays behind the other side of the computer screen, right? Straying off topic, not answering the prompt completely, or you start in one topic and you end up in another. You only have 650 words, which is not a lot. So make sure that you're staying on topic there. and then having a strong beginning, but then running out of steam at the end. Make sure that your beginning and your ending is equally as strong. And oftentimes I'll advise students to, write an essay, go more than 650 words, print it out, cut up each of the paragraphs, and reorganize the essay to see what fits best for your common application essay. Here's some advice. I think I covered most of these. I think the third point, spell check, doesn't catch everything. So make sure that you reread your essay. Get started on your essay as early as possible, because you are going to run out of time and you are going to want to have, 5 to 10 revisions of the same essay before you submit that. And then another common mistake that I see is that when students are writing their essays in Google Doc or in Microsoft Word, and then you copy that essay and paste it into the Common App section, oftentimes Common App will reorganize your essay and make it a 1-paragraph essay. And so that's something to think about, making sure that after you copy and paste into the Common App section, before you hit submit, just scroll through the very tiny box that you can expand on, but scroll through it and make sure that all your paragraphs are there, all your punctuation is there in your supplemental essay, that you did not accidentally copy an essay meant for a different college into that box. These are all things that are really important to think about. I believe that's most of my time. I have my email right there if you want to reach out to me. And I also have a QR code right there if you want to scan and learn more about Oxy, or you want to, save and download my contact into your phone. You can do that as well. Again, pass it back to Allan and see if there's any questions about the Common application, the applications in general, or essays.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting essay question. So before the Duanduan go, anyone want a question? Yes, we have.
So have you noticed any particular differences between private school and public school when they're applying? And if so, like, how distinct are they, and what should I be careful of?
Are you referring to private high schools, or private and public high schools, or colleges and universities?
High school.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we think about, right? How much resources do you have as a student in the community that you're in? So when we're looking at students from a public high school versus a private high school, there's definitely a big difference in the education disparity in the US. It's not always, apples to apples, but we definitely, there's some really well-resourced public high schools, and there are some under-resourced private schools in the US. But in general, we look at students within the context of your high school. So we're not going to look at you in comparison to, if you attend a public high school in Georgia, we're not going to compare you to a student who is attending a private high school in California, right? Because those, in terms of your resources, are vastly different. And so we're going to look at you within your state, your community, your school. And that's really just on our bias training. So making sure that we're not being, that we're creating a fair game for everyone with the resources that you're offered in your area that you grew up in. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
So any further question? All right, so let's thank you for the Duanduan again.
Hi, have a great rest of your day.
So I would take probably before the next session. So let's take a 5 minutes break. And if you have further question, or like don't have any information, so that every time you have information, you can just let me know. And so right now it's 2:45, so we will be back like 50. Okay, thank you. Then there's the water there and also the cookie there. Just feel free to say.
I did pick up. I listened. Well, what's the truth?
So I want to explain.
Okay, great. Okay.
As a computer science student. And, oh, if you guys want to follow along PowerPoint with the QR code, the text might be small. You guys can, but otherwise, if you guys see it, it should be fine as well. Oh, okay. Okay. So
You have to press
Okay.
twice. Yep.
okay. Did everyone get the QR code? Okay. Say- Oh, okay. Alright, so I think there's some people here that haven't taken SAT yet, ACT. Am I right? Are there any underclassmen, like freshmen, sophomores? Okay, so yeah, I can go over this today then. So as Patrick said earlier, there are some schools that are test optional now, or like they no longer require test scores. But it's still, I would still recommend that you guys take it. And like, for example, the University of California system does not take SAT or ACT at all. They only look at like your GPA and essays, and that's pretty much, they don't take recommendation letters either. So that's one thing to take into consideration if you guys are targeting UCs. But if you guys are going to take the haven't taken the SAT or ACT yet, it's important to, I think, to get those out of the way before 12th grade. Because during 12th grade you'll have a lot of things to handle, you know, your grades, your essays, applications, other commitments, extracurriculars. So if you guys can get those out of the way before you start the college application process, that would be ideal. And from my experience, for those that haven't taken either one yet, in my opinion, I found the ACT to be easier, in terms of how easy it is to obtain a higher score on the test. So the SAT, generally speaking, will have fewer questions per section, but there'll also be more time per question, but the questions will be a little harder. But ACT will tend to have easier questions and less time per questions. So the main part of the ACT is just time management. As long as you can get the questions done fast, then you should be able to get a pretty good score. Moving on. So one of the most important things of getting a good score on these standardized tests is practice, because you'll realize that many of the questions aren't, like, so to speak, hard. It's just they're kind of tricky. So it's mostly just like test taking skills that you need to work on through practice. And I provided some resources here. Like the College Board offers, like, I think 8 practice tests online on their website. But you can also look on third-party sites. If you guys look for SAT resources or ACT resources, you can find, like, I mean, kind of illegal, but like people will post like previous tests that you can print out and practice. But I didn't link those. But you guys, if you guys look hard enough, you'll find it. But if you the more you take these practice tests, mock tests, you'll realize that every time you usually get the same types of questions wrong. Like you'll nail the same questions right every time, but so after you take a few practice tests, you'll know which questions you need to work on, and then you can just keep on. Which is why it's important to look at what you got right and what you got wrong on the tests, so that you can find these patterns and improve. And I mean, I didn't put it here, but I just used a SAT book. It's like you can find it on Amazon. It's called the Black Book. It doesn't really have anything. It just kind of um, explains how to take the test. Like it provides you test taking skills. And I think what I found the most helpful was on the English section. It provides all like the rules that you need to know, like how to do well in English, and you can just memorize those. And then, so I got a perfect score on the English section because of that book. But it's just the black book. But anyways, moving on. So this is probably something that I would have wanted to know before I started applying. But there are, I think, 5 different types of deadlines when you're applying to school. And early action, as I think Mr. Patrick said earlier, early decision and early action are very, very valuable towards your application process. Although it does provide a little bit more pressure because you have to, you're in more of a rush at the beginning of senior year to get all your applications in. Early action and early decision do show that you're interested in the school. And another plus of early action is they have schools, if they decide that you aren't exactly fit to be accepted into early action, like it might be too competitive in early, they'll sometimes defer you, which basically gives you 2 chances to get into this. So they'll defer you to regular admissions, and then they'll review your application again. And then sometimes the reason why they defer you is because they think that you're not exactly fit, like you aren't competitive enough to be admitted into early, but they think that you would be a good student that they would consider admitting in regular decision. So I think that was really helpful. And then early decision is legally binding. So yeah, it's only one school, and it's mostly private schools. And I think the deadline is November 1st for a lot of the schools. And for early action, they're usually open from August to November. And then the decisions released between December and January. There's also early action 2 and early decision 2 that you guys should be aware of. If you guys miss the first early deadline and still wanted to apply early, some schools, not all schools, will have deadlines in January as well to give you an opportunity to apply that. And then we have more deadlines. So regular admissions, as I went over earlier, those are usually between early January to mid-February. And then I don't exactly recommend applying regular to schools that you don't really feel like you would get. Like, for example, if your stats aren't exactly the most competitive, I would still recommend applying early first because like I said, it gives you two chances. And then there's also as the previous speaker said, it's restrictive early action, which is kind of like early decision, but it's not legally binding. So you can only apply to that school, and you can't apply to any other early decision schools. And we also have rolling admissions, which is like the least common, but some schools will have this, which is basically like the deadlines will be at the end of the year, or like sometimes like in May. So you can just apply whatever you want. But those, like I said, are a lot more rare. And be sure to look at like every school like on Common App, because some people, like a lot of deadlines tend to happen on the same day, but obviously every school will be different. So it's very, very important that you don't miss the deadlines. So it's important that you double check on their website or on Common App. Sometimes, like if there's like there for some reason, schools may also delay their deadlines by like maybe 2 weeks or something if there's a reason to. But so you should always be on the lookout for that as well. And then as for recommendation letters, if you guys have not yet asked for recommendation letters, usually this is what people will do. They'll usually find one STEM teacher
and then one humanities teacher. And then in your senior year of high school, your school counselor will reach out to you and then tell you to, you know, give them some information so they can help you write a recommendation letter from the counselor as well. But as I said before, each school's requirements are different. You'll find that I'll continue to reiterate that, but it's very important that I mentioned because some schools don't require recommendation letters. So like, for example, the University of California system, like, if you request, like my school uses Naviance, it's an application platform to request transcripts and request recommendation letters. So some schools that don't require them and you still request it from the teacher to be sent to the school, you might run into some issues. So, and ideally, you want to ask the teacher, like right before the summer of 11th grade or at the beginning of senior year, and because you want to give this the teachers time. Like you shouldn't. There's some students that go up to the teachers, 2 weeks before the deadlines, and then it'll make the teacher a lot less inclined to write your letter for you. And you should always be polite. And then afterwards, you thank them and follow up with them about what schools they helped you get into, and then small gifts are always nice as well. Just to appreciate their help. And then moving on, we have research. So research is a very, very important step of the process in terms of applying to college. Because as I said, every school is different. So you want to know more about each school, which is why you want to do a lot of research. So I know some websites like Reddit and forum may get a bad rap, but okay, first of all, you should look at school websites. Like obviously, those will give the most accurate information in terms of updates and professors, programs, opportunities, research. But other than that, websites such as Reddit and Quora, they give really, really good anecdotal information. Like you can ask people that actually go to the school, like current students, and they'll answer questions for you about what you want to know. Like, for example, applying to the school or opportunities at the school or what it's like at the school. Any kind of thing you can ask them because they're actual like students there. So in terms of the differences between Reddit and Quora, I think from my experience, Reddit usually provides faster answers to your questions. Like if you were to ask on Reddit, like which school should I choose between this or this? Usually they'll answer within 24 hours. Quora, it might take a few weeks, or I don't know. And also be aware that some older posts may be a little outdated. Like for example, they might talk about the school systems and schools change their policies every year, so you should always be aware of that. In terms of rankings, these are pretty important in terms of looking for which schools you want to apply to. So I use US News, which everybody probably knows about. And then there's also UK rankings that are made by QS, and then they're called QS World Rankings. And they rank basically all the world universities. And then one very important thing is that, for example, in one of your supplemental essays, if the school asks, why do you want to attend our school? Please don't mention, oh, this school is ranked number 3 in this major. That will not help you at all in terms of the admissions process. Okay. And so researching during applications. So like I said, researching these will help you find which schools to apply to. Like you'll be able to find out which schools will give you the best opportunities, which schools have the best professors, which schools fit you. And then when you research during the applications, you also want to learn more about the school. So you want to find something kind of special about each school. Like, why are you applying to this school? And then that will really help you write the questions regarding why this school or like why this major. And because when they ask you, what are you going to do with this major in the future? Or what are you going to do with this degree in the future? You'll really want to do research on the school itself to get that kind of information. And then furthermore, we have, if you guys are planning to apply to a more competitive major, like I was applying to computer science, you'll come to find that a lot of schools will offer, as Ms. Patrick said earlier, there will be very, very similar majors that the schools offer. Like it's not just computer science. Like for example, at Berkeley, they offer computer science in their engineering college, I think. And then they also offer one in their liberal arts and sciences college, which is generally easier to get into, but it's still very competitive because it's Berkeley. But if you weren't as confident, like for example, the flagship Berkeley program, I think the acceptance rate is only like 2%. So, but if you were to apply to maybe their liberal arts college, it would probably go up to maybe around 6-7%. I'm just guessing, but anyways, because I applied, me personally, I applied to UIUC, University of Illinois, if you guys are applying to computer science. But it's a very, very well-known computer science university. And so their computer science major, it's completely locked. So it's the one major that you can't change into once you get into the school. But they do offer a program called CS plus X. So I applied as a statistics and computer science major and I was accepted. So the CS plus X generally has probably between a 10 and 20% acceptance rate, but their normal computer science is only around 5%, I think. But if you look at the course requirements, they're pretty much almost the same. It's just kind of like minoring in the plus X area of the computer science. But that so, and other schools, obviously, like for example, UC San Diego, they offer like data science, or some schools have like cognitive science, which is like also you can also go into computer science, but obviously that's just as a computer science applicant. But just be on the lookout for any similar majors, or a much easier way if you guys are targeting Georgia Tech. Before you get in, you could just completely declare a different major. Or once you get in, once you get in, you can completely declare a different major from what you applied as. Like for example, there was a student at my school. I think he applied German, which is not competitive at all. And then he got in, and then immediately after getting in, he submitted his enrollment deposit, and then just clicked a few buttons, and he's a computer science student, their most competitive major. So that kind of information you can probably find on their website. You just have to do a little more digging. But some schools do make it harder, like to transfer, such as UIUC, like their most competitive majors. They'll make it very, very difficult for you to change majors. But some schools will make it very easy. So just from my experience, at least. So research after receiving decisions. So I was accepted, I would say, if for people applying the same major as me, I would say it could be considered some dream schools for a lot of students, like top 5, top 20 programs, you know. But one thing the things you have to take into consideration after getting into these universities is which universities to choose. Like once you have if you have a lot of options, for example, it's kind of hard to choose between one or the other. And then so you're going to want to take into consideration the cost. Like for example, I ended up choosing UGA because of the in-state tuition as well as the open Zeller scholarship. So I would end up getting like fully covered for my tuition. But whereas at another university, even though computer science is very high paid, right? I would still end up having to pay in the end, like total cost, including living and food. You would still end up having to pay like between $200,000 and $300,000. And if you guys are applying to private schools as well, that would be even more. And if you think about it, if you guys were to take debt for that much amount of money, in just undergraduate alone, like I'm sure there's some people here looking to pursue a further degree like medical school, law school, business school, you know, those types, you're gonna want to save money for those degrees. So, you know, spending that much money in your undergraduate degree, if you guys are trying to look for like if you guys are trying to go to graduate school, it's just not exactly the best idea in my opinion. And then also you want to take into consideration the location of the university. Like for example, if it's in a rural area or an urban areas, like sometimes the opportunities will be different depending on where it's located. And then also the distance from home. Like you'll be surprised, like how much inconvenience, like for example, if you were living in some random middle of nowhere in another state, and then you had to fly over every winter break, every Thanksgiving, you have to take those into consideration as well. That's extra cost. And then also safety. Safety is also obviously very important because some campuses do tend to be more dangerous than others in terms of crime rates. And then you also want to compare the programs. Like on the school websites, they all say like the exact same thing about their school. Like we're top ranked, we have the world-class professors, we have Nobel Prize winning staff and faculty, and then you know it's just the same kind of things, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. Like you want to look more into what really makes these schools different. Like for example, some professors at some schools are known to give their students a very hard time. Like they're known to like make it hard for you to pass, graduate. And some professors at other schools will tend to give students a better time in terms of like their studies. So that's also something that you might want to take into consideration. Okay, so next, I know previous speaker already went over this, but Common App is the platform that most schools will be using to take applications. And so you can select up to 20 universities on this platform. And but you also have the University of California system. Again, they're kind of special. They don't really they don't use this platform at all. So you have to create an account on their platform and then submit a separate application. And they also have essays there. They don't use a Common App essay at all. Okay, the Common App essay. There's 7 prompts and you choose one, as a previous speaker said. And I think it's the best idea to start like before senior year or at the very beginning if you guys can do that. I started really late, which is a mistake. And a piece of advice is don't sit there thinking that, you know, my essay is going to be bad. My essay, you know, won't be, that'll just hinder you from starting, right? So just try to get some ideas down at the very beginning. Don't like prevent yourself from just writing something down. Like one piece of advice that I would give is think about who will actually be reading this. Like you're applying to become a student at a university, right? For example, like Mr. Patrick said, if you can't really find any character traits, another thing that you can think about is, like, for example, maybe you're not the most outstanding person in the world. You haven't, you know, cured cancer yet, but you can think about one thing. There's something that you can always fall back on if you are really confused on where to start on the Common App essays. And that is being that you're applying as a student. So you can just show qualities that that you you want to show the application or the admissions officer, the person reading your application, that you'll be a good fit at their school, right? And you're applying to an educational institution and you want to show them that you fit there. So like the main thing that you'll be doing there is learning, right? So just show that you want to learn, you have a hunger for learning, or show that you are a good student, you're responsible and things like that. And if obviously if you already have something in mind that you want to write about that shows how great of a person you are, then that's great too. But if you guys are like me personally, I struggle thinking about that. So I just wrote about how I could be a good student and how I'll be a good learner and how so I just wrote about how something in my life um helps build good habits in terms of my learning ability. But that's just something to think about as well. Okay. So college portals, I didn't really know much about these before applying to university, but after submitting your application through Common App, within a few days, the university will send you an email telling you to create an account on their website. And then you should do this as soon as possible because some schools will require you to like self-report grades, or because some schools they won't look at your transcript, they'll just look at like your self-reported grades. Like for example, the University of California system, you don't send transcripts to them at all. They just look at self-reported GPA, which is a little weird. So you always have to follow, their requirements, just follow their instructions very, very clearly. Because if you don't and they find out, they might rescind your application. But okay, so college portals are also where updates regarding your application can be found. Oh, actually, I forgot to mention, University of California system, they have a application platform, and then the schools also have their own portals, which is a little weird. But you submit your self-reported scores through the application portal, not the application platform, not the school's portal. But the portal is where you'll find updates to your college admission status, like if they let you in or they rejected you. And this is also where you see that the school received your transcripts, recommendation letters, and AP scores. So I think this is pretty good information that I would have wanted to know as well. And again, each school will have different portals and different requirements. So if some may require you to do more than other schools, and some may just require you to log in. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Or some may not even require you to log in at all. Like you could just check when the decision comes out, and that's it. Okay, supplemental essays. So each school again will have different requirements in terms of supplemental essays. But the most common essay prompts that I ran into throughout my application process, I think I applied to 14 universities, but I only applied to public universities because anyways, but the most common essay prompt that I ran into was usually asking, why do you want to attend our school? And then why do you want to choose this major? And then over time, as you write these more and more of these essays, you'll find out that these prompts are very, very similar. So what you want to do, what you can do is that you can start adapting previous essays to the school, but obviously don't make any mistakes. Like for example, I think I heard a story. Someone one time got the school mascot wrong, and that's obviously a problem when you're applying to their university. But you can once you start writing more and more of these essays, you'll get more used to writing them faster, better overall. And what I suggest is that you gather all your supplemental essay prompts into one location. Like for example, I put all my essay prompts into one Google Doc in chronological order of the deadlines. I did early deadlines pretty much. But basically just put them all in one document so you don't have to keep on logging into Common App over and over. And that really wastes your time and it can be very, very inefficient. And then also writing in separate documents is very important because the Common App essay or the Common App platform isn't exactly built the best, but writing it, but when you do copy and paste it back into Common App, as previous speaker said earlier, remember to reformat the essay itself because it may mess up some of like the spacing, other things. And okay. In terms of extracurriculars, I think if you're a rising 12th grader, I would suggest that you don't really take any more commitments than you already have. And then you should focus more on your applications instead, like, because like, for example, if you were trying to get in more that you would obtain after you submit your application, it's not really of any use to you. So if you focus on optimizing your applications, that would be a lot more valuable towards your college admissions process than if you were to take a leadership position that, or like apply to a leadership position that requires a lot of different steps, and then you don't even get that position until, you know, after November or December. And then if you are an underclassman or a 11th grade is a little late, but maybe the freshmen, sophomores, or even like middle schoolers, 8th graders, I would suggest like you guys try to find something that interests you if you haven't already. And then you should also, if you are struggling to find that kind of direction that you want to go into, you're going to want to join clubs and organizations or look online. And then as previous speaker said, obviously volunteer service always looks good. And like, so, and leadership awards and accomplishments, they look good as well. But obviously it's going to be hard for everyone to have first place in something. So just try to focus more on like, if, for example, if you can't find an award, if you aren't able to get an award in first place or second place in something nationwide, you can always look into something that you're truly interested in. Like, schools often like to see extracurriculars that are related to your major. And like, for example, if you, but they also want to see that you accomplish something. Like, for example, if you just say you were in the robotics club, I wouldn't say that really helps. But if you say you were in the robotics club and you actually did something, like you helped your team get to, you know, nationals, or if you were in a coding club and you built a website, or if you were in like, I don't know about many other clubs, but I'm sure if you wrote in your application that you actually did something, that's a lot more valuable than just saying you were in the club. And I think that's closing thoughts. So yeah, I'm just gonna reiterate what I said throughout this presentation. So again, timing is very important. So it's very important to get things out of the way as soon as possible, because you're gonna be under an extreme amount of pressure if you don't do that. Like, for example, if you have to manage, as I said before, manage so many different things at one time, it's going to be hard to make your application as good as possible. And each school will have different application requirements, which is very, very important, because you never, even the smallest mistake can, it can mess up your whole application process. Like, for example, if your dream school, if you miss the deadline for that school, that would be completely detrimental to your application process. And then the last thing is, when you're doing research, I think cross-referencing information is very, very important, because as I said before, making any errors will be a big problem. And I think that is, and if there are any questions, please ask me.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan? Or you can talk to Ryan later. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Thanks again for that. Next speaker will be the final sharing. So just a quick explanation. Maybe a lot of people join us and didn't know what's the Monte Jade. So the Monte Jade, maybe you heard it, the Monte Jade, the mountain highest peak in Taiwan. So that's the almost 4,000 meters. So we can say to be the highest peak in East Asia. So that's the name come from our organization, Monte Jade. The Monte Jade is mostly the Taiwan as the recognized community. So we are a community and then we are explored to the Asia, to the worldwide. So that's the technical business, but also here we are focused on trying to contribute our background to the young generation. So the next slide, just very quick, is for my personal, is like my personal background, like me, and I work for a company called Winmax. So it's a Taiwanese-based company, and I've established the branch office in the US. And like I said, among J's, we have similar background. We are also an Asian American technology company and a community. So what's the in common is for me and also our Monte Jade organization and also you, I think that you have been working with a lot of your parents and have some ties with the Asia, either Taiwan or China. And we are also dealing with a lot of cross culture. I think you are handling 2 different cultures or 3 different cultures daily. But what's the important thing is I think that people say what's the nature for the culture. I think that very apparently like a language difference. And I think you are learning both language, bilingual or even trilingual. But if we think a little bit further, something different is also that from the languages, you also be able to see the different species from different perception and also different communication way. For example, in some country or some culture is more direct communication, but some culture is you speak a lot direct. And also you need to have different viewpoint, and also there's an alternative standpoint is a lot in different culture you are more the top down. Everything both says something that you follow. Or another way is more bottom up. You need to be more collective, more decision. But also there's a decision process and work-life style difference. It's like different meanings. Like we always say, like in the stop sign here in the US, it's different meaning when you talk in the stop sign in the US and you talk the stop sign in Taiwan. And also they talk about when you talk about the traffic meaning in Kansas City and in Atlanta is definitely different. And the traffic, you are in traffic in Beijing, maybe that's totally different story. So there's a lot of different kind of say there's different perception, different standpoint. But most important is probably there's some conflicts in your different cultures belief, like different cultures, some is more religion, but some culture is more collectively. But what's the mentor for this one? And there's some sharing for our from our organization is also with you is that's the suggestion is you are able to give this, you can see things from different perspective. And same thing as when you are applying college, you want to turn your multicultural background as your assets instead of just the conference. And same thing as a company, we have a different cultural background, and you don't want to just manage the culture. You want to turn this culture as diversification as your company's as assets. And also same thing as our Monte Jade organization is we're trying to promote the technology to communicate with business, but we're also trying to promote all our multicultural kids, teenagers to be able to learn something more, to be turn this thing something in your background, you will be able to see things from different perspective, and your ability can create some synergy for your college. This is something we think is the big message for you, and we want to be through this process to let you to be able to emphasize this and leverage this. I think this is the very beginning of the mission of the Monte Jade organization. I would want to have this seminar for everybody, and I want to have the YA achievement. Yeah, so this is I think most of you heard about Young Achiever Awards. And so we have totally at least 10 awards for the junior student and also senior student. And there's some benefit for you, so you get familiar with the college application. So in order to get this Young Achiever Awards, you need to go through same thing as college application. So especially this year, the essay also changed to be the similar topic as common app. So when you are writing this, you get something, you're familiar with the process, and also, of course, you can recognize it, present your data in front of the big audience. That's it's very good experience for you, and also connect with the other outstanding students. And the good things for this year, another one. So we already started registration. So yes, the college seminar day, and the deadline is September 9th. So you still have a 1 month to go with this one. And the good things for this year is this year it used to be if you apply once, especially for the 11th grade, the junior student. Some of them you are junior, some are senior, but it used to be if you apply and you get more, you cannot apply again. But this year we made something change. If you are unless you are the top 2 award, otherwise you can apply again. So this is encouraged by 11th grade. You can just apply, and of course the senior maybe have better outstanding than the 11th grade, but you can still apply, and then you can get it again next year. So don't worry, you just apply this year. I think this is the benefit of changes what we make. Okay, so the information is all here, and I think that today we will also make our video. We will upload to our YouTube channel. So sorry for the online people. So some of people cannot join, but we will definitely share our YouTube channel, our video. It's a YouTube channel. And just very quick, this is the location is belong to the OCAC. So they also give us some, if you have time, if you want to try to see, if you want to study law in Taiwan, they offer some for the Taiwanese student, some good scholarship there. So that's just alternative. But even you are not the overseas Taiwanese student, you are not just the international student, they also offer different kind of scholarship. Yeah, this is you have something so about this, talk to the OCAC here. That I think this is a good turning down. All right. So maybe before we end, any question for the speaker? Yeah, yes, I notice that you probably have something you need to access privately. So we still have our local location in Warsaw. So after this, just feel free to talk with them. So at the last, I want to thank you for our speakers. Oh, yeah. First, Miss Patrick. Right, thank you for Patrick. Vicky. Last one is Brian. Right. So thank you all. So there's some quote on the back. And thank you, everybody, move to the front. And we have one big photo.
They go.
Take a PowerPoint, the first page, PowerPoint.
上会打到要沟通。
Why?
Okay, man. 好，请大家到这边来好了，就是
到那边好，
到这边好了
对，对，前面的。
谢谢。
I just want to sleep, right?